Dear What Lurks Beneath, I am writing in from Malmö, Sweden, about a disturbing experience that occurred during the fall of 2017. I am a Swedish woman, 52 years old, and I have a grown-up daughter. My daughter is 28 now, and her father died young, well over 20 years ago, leaving me a young widow. Although this information might seem unimportant, it has caused me to acquire a strong self-belief and no-nonsense attitude. I do not watch TV or read the news, but rather spend my time volunteering at stables, working with horses, or even doing freelance work as an interpreter. Life is good, but there has been something that has been on my mind for years, and is really weighing me down. I have always thought of myself as a gutsy lady, brave, unmoving, not disturbed by the usual female fears, spiders, bugs, etc. Instead, I will happily go for a walk at night alone, drive in the countryside alone, and even go on holiday alone. Solitude is central to my life, and I have grown accustomed to it. But lately, this solitude has become a prison, a breeding ground for my nightmares and feelings of terror and panic. I have now been frightened to leave the house. Instead, I peer at my village from behind my curtains. The road into Malmö is bustling with cars, but I can never go near the city. The panic is felt across every inch of my body. This level of panic and depression has been my existence for the last 3 years, and I should begin to tell you how it all began. It's not as if I was happy to begin with, but I've always been content with my lot. Every morning, for the last 20 years, I have taken a walk at our local woods at around 8 a.m. every morning. I had this morning ritual until the autumn of 2017. When my daughter was younger, I used to bring her, but the last 10 years or so, I have walked alone. The autumn of 2017 was particularly ravishing. I remember gazing at the plethora of yellows and oranges on the forest floor, and grabbing an armful of leaves and throwing them into the sky, watching them fall and dance around me. This was me at my happiest, at one with nature. The crunching of the leaves against my boots was also mesmeric, and I felt totally at peace and excited for the future. I can tell you, it was the 20th of October when I had a paranormal experience that confirmed my belief in other beings, sinister creatures. I was walking at a fast pace, and I had a light with me, as the pathway was dark. The sun was still coming up, and the sky was a medium blue hue. I have always loved how quiet it was on these mornings. It was always a perfect way to start the day. As I continued walking, I could hear a groaning sound from behind the trees to my left. I wasn't disturbed by this, but just assumed it was some kind of animal. As I continued walking, I also heard a whispering from the other side of the pathway. Loud whispers that sounded like men talking. I turned to my right and scanned in behind the trees, but I couldn't see anything. I always carried my peppermint spray, and I am trained in jiu-jitsu, so if any bad guys had any intentions, I was confident that I could take care of them. I was now fairly deep in the woods, and it was around 30 minutes back to the entrance, and 30 minutes to the exit. The sky was only getting brighter. I found it odd that I couldn't hear any birds singing. Usually, the forest was abuzz with all types of birdsong, and I would try and remember the rhythm and calls and research it after my walk in a book that I had at home. I loved interpreting the signs of nature too. I would arrive home and tell my daughter what the weather was going to be like next week, judged on the direction of how the wind was blowing or the color of the foliage. She would just roll her eyes and call me a tree hugger. And well, she was right. I never felt more like myself when I was walking in that forest, immersed in Mother Earth's glory. But this morning, there were no birds singing. The only sound was my feet against the wet leaves, and the swoosh of my rain jacket as I power walked deeper and deeper into the woods. I was going at a fast pace now, but all of a sudden, out of nowhere, my foot tripped and I ended up face down on the wet forest floor. I also banged my head and rubbed it. My eyes felt a little off as I opened them, and I was dizzy. I really banged my head bad. My eyes were only seeing the floor, but with little white dots dancing around, as if I was under disco headlights. I had lived enough to know that this was a sign of a concussion. I scrambled my eggs down in my pockets and tried to retrieve my phone. Feeling it, I knew I had to ring the emergency services. There was no chance anyone else would be walking this early in the morning. The next thing I remember, I was feeling a bite at my leg. I screamed in agony and tried to kick whatever it was. Likely a fox, I thought. But no, it was something terrible. I was being carried from the pathway into the trees and foliage. I opened my eyes, but they were now only black. Something was clawing at my legs, too, causing me to wince in pain. I could also feel a pain in my lower stomach. It reminded me of the pains of childbirth. Had I been stabbed? The next thing that happened, I was thrown down in some kind of muddy puddle. I was too afraid to open my eyes, as I had no idea what had carried me in, and I knew I was in no fit state to fight back. As I opened my eyes, I realized I could see now. I scanned around, and my stomach seemed to fall into oblivion as I took in what I was seeing. Around me, there was a ring of tiny men with long noses, beards, pointy shoes, and even green hats. The men were around 2 to 3 feet tall and were watching me with an angry, solemn, indifferent expression. The only way I can describe them was that they were like goblin-like or elven-like, but to say that they were elves sounds too cuddly and cute. These creatures were hideous looking, absolutely diabolical. I began to wonder if I'd given myself a bad concussion and was now suffering hallucinations, but the imagery around me felt all too real, and the physicality of what I was feeling was also seeped into reality. This was happening, and I felt sick to my stomach. "Help," I remember muttering, but the words came out in pitiful gasps. I remember thinking about my daughter and how she would never know what happened to her mother. I was told I must not come here again, one of these things said, telepathically. It told me if I did, I would pay. I tried to answer to this thing, but the next thing that happened, I woke up in the car park of the forest. I looked at the reflection in the car and had scrapes and cuts all over my face. My hair was filled with twigs and debris, and as I looked down at my trousers, I realized I had peed myself. I raced into my car and drove home. Driving home, I was ranting and raving. I could have swore I saw one of those creatures in my back seat. I screamed maniacally and had to slam on the brakes as I was about to crash into the back of a lorry. And what had the goblins said about my husband? Andrew was 30 and died in a car accident all the way back in 2000. Had he been killed? My heart sank as I knew Andrew had the same ritual as me, but he went an hour earlier, at 7 in the morning. He had the same experience, but had been killed, clearly. It was too horrendous and unspeakable to think about. Telling my daughter about what had happened was nearly harder than the experience. She thought that I was crazy, that I had dementia, or that I was making it up for attention. It was the most heartbreaking thing to have her call me demented. I also tried to reach out to a few close friends, but they advised me to speak to my doctor and told me that stress and loneliness can cause people to see things that aren't there. I wasn't stressed or lonely, I told them. I saw something terrible, and I need you to believe me. Just one person to tell me that I'm not losing my mind. All I can say is that everyone thinks I'm crazy, and it makes me feel like hell. It's the loneliest feeling in the world, to be honest. But as I sit here, I know what I saw. Most days, I feel like a ghost, watching life happen from behind a glass mirror. I feel like I violated something in the forest, that I disturbed another world, and that world now had to kick me out. I've heard about fairies being possessive, but I've never thought about goblins, nor did I ever believe in such a ridiculous sentiment. I can't describe to you the fear and terror I feel on a daily basis. I live just a short drive from the forest, and I can see the tips of the trees from the top of my bathroom window. I know it's a means of self-torture, but sometimes I go up there and look out at the glimpse of the forest, imagining myself there again, violated and all alone, about to be sacrificed. I wonder, has anybody else had an experience like this? I'm just too afraid to reach out. My doctor has not been confidential, and now people around me think I'm crazy. It is a terribly lonely feeling that I live with every single day. I just hope that writing this experience in helps me. And not just me, but other people who can get in contact with you, and perhaps enlighten others about what they saw. Perhaps these are not vicious at all. Maybe it was my misinterpretation. But I just think of their cold eyes, watching me, treating me like a prey, a wretched thing on the forest floor. My daughter stopped speaking to me last year. She couldn't deal with my constant rants about what had happened. I dream about going back up there with a shotgun and shooting every last one of those fuckers. How dare they cause me to descend into madness, because that's what my life has now become. Sheer madness and misery. I have not washed my hair in 6 months. I look like a wreck. Neighbors turn away from me, and children are now frightened. I've become something else entirely. I don't know what's even happening to me anymore. I'm losing my mind.